All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Barry Merrick. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy, and I'm extremely excited for a conversation focusing on dare to inspire, how we can all spark inspiration within ourselves and also sustain that inspiration for us, our teams, and all the people that we come across. It's my pleasure to introduce all of you to three incredible women, Sandy, Allison, and Jen. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you all doing?
Great.
Excited to talk with you all.
Totally glad to be here.
So glad to have you here. Before we get started, I want to hear from each of you a little summary of your journey and how you ended up focusing on this topic of inspiration.
Sure.
So
go
for it, Allison. Go for it.
I'll jump in. You know, one of my earliest memories with this topic, this idea of inspiration, was back when I was in undergraduate college at Dartmouth, and I took a course with a psychology professor who actually tricked me and the entire class within a couple minutes into thinking that mental telepathy was real. And it was pretty wild. Everyone in the room was convinced that, you know, we were able to read each other's minds, and it was this incredible experience. And what that produced in me was a fascination with the human emotions and human mind. Because I thought, wow, if I can be convinced in this short amount of time that mental telepathy is actually a real thing, and it's really a mental Jedi mind trick, how powerful is that? Right? What else can my mind convince me of? And it really inspired me. So I became inspired during that time in terms of human psyches, understanding them, and human emotions. And so that was my original source. My career's gone different directions throughout the years. I've worked in education, psychology. I worked with for many years with what's now called the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, helping them crack the code on how to understand emotions, and eventually brought me to meeting these two wonderful women, my co-CEOs, Sandy and Jen. And we came together really with this common passion and interest in what drives and motivates and inspires people and how they can bring that into their work.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was wonderful. Sandy or Jen, would you like to go first? All right, good. Next, I mean.
Yeah, I'll go. So my career trajectory was a little bit different, and I really got, I would say the seeds of studying inspiration happened, I would say, in my 20s. I worked in Fortune 500 companies in organization development functions, and I really got to witness the difference that occurred when people were inspired in their work, especially leaders. You know, when leaders are inspired, like, things go well and people are happy. And conversely, when they're not, you know, there's a lot of, it wreaks a lot of havoc. So the seeds were really born there. And then fast forward about 15 years, and after working in large organizations, I just had this itch to build something that I thought, you know, was better than what existed in the marketplace around, you know, the employee experience and redefining modern work. And found these two women, and in our very first, you know, week together, where we were meeting live for one of the first times, you know, we were thinking about aspirationally the difference we wanted our firm to make, and the opportunities, you know, what could it look like at its best? And the word inspiration kept coming up as we reflected on things we were most proud of, you know, the most extraordinary leaders and teams and organizations we had personally witnessed. The word inspiration kept coming up. So that was really where it all started.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. Sandy, over to you.
Yeah, my professional story, I think I would describe as a quest for inspiration. I'm not sure I knew it all the time, but I would love to tell you that I designed this ideal situation for myself and have been thriving in an inspired career forever, but that's really not the truth. I spent my 20s in Silicon Valley, and that was exciting and fun, and we did awesome work. I don't know that I was inspired in that the work didn't pull on my purpose. I wasn't making a difference in the way I wanted to. That then took me into academia, a PhD program, and I've been a professor for the last 20 years with different levels of inspiration. How I was able to connect with my students and the way the institution valued what I was doing with students mattered a lot. And so it really took me 10 years in academia to find a place where I found my tribe. I found people whose purpose was united with mine, and that made all the difference in inspiring work. So I'm much more, I come to this much more selfishly, I think, in terms of experiencing uninspired work and the burn to find inspiration, and then, yes, I've landed, and oh my God, I'm fired up. It feels so good. So again, I express the same gratitude and fortune that Jen and Allison did in finding each other. That's been the thrill then, to be able to think it through more rigorously and codify it for others. That's been inspiring in and of itself, but it's been a quest.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to all three of you. Your inspiration is contagious. I can feel with total conviction that all three of you are working on what inspires you the most. And it's kind of probably like a dream, similar to probably how I feel with Ivy, getting to work on what you love, what you feel is so meaningful. And what I want to dive into now is that even for people like us, let's say, who created their own project that they're most passionate about, and they get to spend every day trying to make it better. Even for me, doing that, you know, I have my days, right? There are some days I'm like overwhelmingly inspired and getting stuff done. And then some other days, sometimes it's easy to also get burnt out, especially if you're feeling particularly inspired and passionate about your project. It can also weigh on you heavier than something you don't care as much about. Yeah. So what I'd love to do is to hear from you how you define inspiration, and also in a way, I guess that can help us also dispel some of like the misconceptions around it. So we'd love to hear from you. How do you define inspiration and why it's so important?
Sure, I'll jump in on that. So first I'll say that in order to get to how to define inspiration, one of the things that we've done is we researched inspiration starting about 5-6 years ago. We looked at the literature, what's out there. There hasn't been much. And we decided that we needed to embark on some of our own original research. So we started interviewing people, leaders across all different kinds of industries, walks of life, and asked them questions about how inspiration works for them, how they experience it, and then how they might be able to create it. Because to your point, I think a lot of times we think of inspiration as something that we have to wait to happen. So based on all these interviews, we actually came up with a pretty unique definition of inspiration, or at least it's different than if you Google definition of inspiration, what you'll see. And I'll share my screen with you as I go through this. There we go. Okay. So what we found is that inspiration is really the dual experience of these two things that are happening at one time. So when you're feeling inspired, and we heard this again and again from those that we interviewed, on the one hand, there's this expanding of possibilities. So people will see new things that they hadn't thought of before. They'll see new solutions to problems. They'll just come up with new ideas. They feel more open or optimistic. So it's like this big opening of, wow, there's new things and new possibilities out there. But it's not just that. Of course, that can feel good and be exciting, but then maybe nothing ever happens with those new possibilities and ideas. So when people are truly inspired, at the same time, they also experience what we call invincibility. And invincibility is this combination of heightened confidence and courage. And we say invincibility, we don't necessarily mean, superheroes jumping off of buildings kind of invincibility. It can really be a small movement of invincibility forward. But the idea is that you suddenly have greater courage and confidence than you had before to take action in a meaningful way towards making those new possibilities come to life. And so as you can imagine, this is a really powerful combination, right? It's like I see new possibilities and I feel this new drive and courage and confidence to then make that happen. So that's how we experience that feeling of inspiration. And, it often feels like this, like you're breathing in this new life and new air into something, which is actually where the root of inspiration comes from. It comes from the Latin word inspirare, which literally means to breathe in air. That's what it feels like. I'm inspired, right? But that's kind of a fleeting thing. That's like this single moment or a quick emotion. So what we also added to our definition and the idea of inspiration is, and that we learned from others, is that it's not just that fleeting emotion, that you can actually take that feeling and sustain it over time as something that you can come back to, you can tap into, you can consciously make it happen. And we do that through what we call is intentional practice. So you can intentionally practice an inspiration mindset where you're aware of when you are more or less inspired, when you need to be inspired, and when you do need more inspiration, you can make it happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allison. And I think just building off of that point, for many of us, a common misconception might be that, well, inspiration comes and goes, right? But you gotta, there's a saying well, you gotta just keep working hard because you're not always gonna be inspired. What you're saying here is that there's actually intentional practices you can put into motion to make sure that your propensity is towards being inspired and you can sustain it for yourself and for the people that you care for, that you work with, and so forth. And I know that the three of you came up with these 18 engines of inspiration. So perhaps this is a good segue to talk about those so that we all get an idea, an overview of all the ways in which we can spark and sustain inspiration.
Sure.
Like even before we go to the 18 engines, if I can just offer a tiny bit of framing that really grounds the engines. One way that we quickly translate our research into something that's really relatable is to say that what inspiration looks like is having your best days more often. Because people can quickly kind of put their mind on what a best day is, or they relate to that experience. And so imagine if you could design or orchestrate having your best days more often through a deliberate practice or a deliberate strategy. And we also like to think about it as like an inspiration quotient, that all of us at any time are kind of running a level of inspiration that we have a responsibility to monitor, and we can control our IQ, our inspiration quotient. We can actually influence how often, or the quantity, the numbers of times we're inspired, as well as the intensity of how we're inspired. So just a couple other little bits before we head into the engines.
I love that. I mean, who doesn't want to have their best days more often?
Yeah.
I love that simple but powerful framework, and I'm excited to learn about how to increase our IQ inspiration quotient.
Yeah. The analogy we use in the book is that it's like working a muscle, right? You go to the gym and strengthen a muscle so that it's more available to you and can carry more, can be stronger and do more. And it's really an apt way to think about a practice of inspiration, to make it more available to you and more powerful when it's enacted. Got to go to the gym. Got to have an intentional practice.
And think about all the practices that we have and the things that are in life that are so important to us, like whether it's a practice in the gym or going to yoga, or different things that we practice that are important. And I mean, when we've talked to leader again and again about what is most important and helpful to them in their work, inspiration is kept coming up. It's critical. It's really critical in our work lives and our personal lives. And so why wouldn't we also want to have a practice in that as well?
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Let's dive into the 18 engines as the overview.
So as we were culling through all the interviews that we did, and imagine us in a hotel conference room in upstate New York with whiteboard sheets, what are those called? Those sticky sheets all over the walls, right? Where we're writing down our notes and making sense of it. And really, we recognize that in the sources of inspiration, these engines that we say can spark inspiration, the sort of go-tos to launch the process and strengthen the muscle, fell into three broad categories, right? And you can think about these as ways to your own go-tos for launching your own inspiration and that of others. It can come from, first category, from within yourself, from who you are, what you do yourself, how you spend your time, what you focus on, how you think through things. The second category in the middle there is about people and relationships. Sometimes inspiration comes from, or we can spark it through, our connection with others, in how we think about other people, whom we admire and look up to, in our interactions with others, in shared mission or common values of things that are happening, even in the way that we support each other, like these things that are happening now with virtual cocktail parties and dinner parties. Even when we're pulled apart, we're still finding ways to inspire each other through connection using technology. Those are the relationship categories of how we spark inspiration for ourselves and others. And then the final category has to do with circumstance. We realize that where you are, what you're observing, how your experience is shared with others, the impact you're having, these are all things that also can drive inspiration in us and make us see that greater sense of possibility and invincibility that can open us up to what inspiration is and feel it more in our lives. So three broad categories: what's inside of us, how we interact with other people, and the circumstances that we're in.
Thanks so much. And I guess under each category, you have a number of steps to help maximize the level of inspiration we feel personally, but also what we can look to encourage in others that we come across, whether they're our colleagues, whether they're our loved ones and family. Given the unique times that we're in right now, where most, if not all of us, are at home, we're unable to, the circumstances are very different, let's put it that way. Just want to help us prioritize between these 18 engines, what have you found during these particular days, during COVID-19, have been the most important engines for inspiration, both as an individual, but also as an organizational leader who is looking to keep their people inspired?
Yeah, I'll jump in with one right at the top. So, you know, the values and purpose engine is actually even higher octane than some of the other ones. It just came up even more often, you know, how one of the most powerful ways to be and sustain inspiration is to know your own values, to act in accordance with them, to activate them, and to activate them against your purpose or a purpose. And so, you know, specifically right now, we are seeing the best of the best in human behavior, and we're also seeing some of the worst of the worst. And that is really a reflection of either misalignment of values or fear overriding values. And so one of the things that we have created, and this is not just in COVID-19, this is a tool that we use in all of the work that we're doing, is we support folks to develop what we call a leader impact statement. And it's just a couple sentences that capture your core values. So if you were to write down 5 values that you want to hold during this crisis, as a person, as a family member, as a leader in your organization, and what would success look like as you lead through this time, right? And you capture that in a statement. And so, for instance, a couple of my values that I want to hold during this time are both stability and creativity. Another one is generosity and kindness. Like, truly, I know I stay more centered when I'm giving, and right, and so and then a sentence that now is an opportunity to lean into the needs of my family and my community and my organization, and to step in, right? So that is just a leader impact statement, but that's a quick example of how. And I have a card that I keep near my desk with this written, so there's a salient reminder in my environment where I can coach myself even during really difficult decisions or conversations, to take a breath and remember my values and really anchor in.
So thank you so much, Jen. And just so very specifically for everybody who's listening to this conversation, what would be like the very specific way in which they can go about coming up with this, the sentences? So you mentioned listing down the 4 or 5 values that you care most about, and you attach it to a purpose, I guess like an outcome or an impact on others. So like, how does somebody go about doing that if they wanted to do it at home later today or tomorrow?
We actually have a 1-page tool that walks you through creating this kind of a statement, and we're happy to make that available to your to all the folks in the webinar here. It's along with a couple other tools that we have on a part of our website that are particularly useful during this time. So it's happy to share that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Sandy. That would be great.
I just wanted to say one more thing about values and purpose, and I think it goes along with shared mission, which is at the bottom of the relationship category. During this time of COVID-19, as co-CEOs running a small business, we've had to make some strategic decisions. How are we going to function during this time? Are we going to suspend our offering? Are we going to increase our prices because we need the revenue desperately and people aren't buying as much? Are we going to give things away? What are we going to do? And we found our strategy, we found our footing by going back to our core purpose as a business and wanting to make, just what we told you at the top of the talk today, of wanting to make a difference in people's lives and help them find inspiration. And that's been the root of writing out our strategy for navigating this really uncertain business environment. So I think business leaders can use that as well as a place to stand for their inspiration in their business going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandy. So starting point, it seems like whether there is a pandemic or not, being clear on your values and purpose is like a really important ingredient to making sure that you can have your inspiration sparked and sustained. Yes. Let's continue. What other engines of inspiration are most relevant today?
I'd love to jump in on one because I don't know if maybe the audience members have seen on social media, there have been circulating different articles related to, for example, Sir Isaac Newton, who apparently came up with all kinds of theories and great work during a pandemic that he experienced during his time. So this idea that he used this time of social distancing, which is what they did at that time as well, to really think through things deeply and came up with some really interesting ideas. And I think, there are many people who are experiencing this where they are at home and they have more time than they normally would. Not everybody, because there are people who are also essential workers on the front lines where it's almost the opposite experience, where they're being really overextended. But for those people who are at home and may have more time than typical, maybe they're not commuting every day, et cetera. one of the engines that I think that can be relevant is called unstructured time. And you see it, it's the fifth one down on the column of inspiration engines that are personal engines. So things that you can do on your own. And unstructured time, it's this theme that we heard again and again in leaders, where it's just open time that you give to reflect. You're not trying to actively solve problems. You're giving yourself breathing room and brain space to reflect, think deeply, just let your mind wander. And I think it's, in today's society, sometimes it's hard for people because, they want to fill things with more productivity and things that are concrete that, they're accomplishing. And maybe even now during this pandemic, people are home and saying, I need to get stuff done and be productive. But we found again and again that many of the top leaders really understand this as being an essential part of how they stay inspired, and how they come up with new and innovative ideas to help solve some of these biggest problems that we have. But it requires almost a discipline to say, I need to carve out time where I'm really going to give myself permission and freedom to just think deeply and just have some time that's not structured around productivity. And it can often lead to really, really great results.
Thank you, Allison. That makes me think about maybe one way we can approach this, going back to what Jen said about how to have your best day more often. If we were to think about it from the framework of a given day, right? Let's say you're an organizational leader, like pretty much everybody who's listening today. And from the moment you wake up to the moment that you go to sleep, with all the personal and professional interactions that you have throughout your day, what are the best ways that you found to structure your day such that, between like that sense of inspiration versus a sense of like you're just getting through your day, and you just want it to be over? How do you like tilt the balance towards living an inspired day from the beginning till the end? Because I feel like, and including, morning routine, but then once you're at work, how you run meetings, how you structure your time. Maybe we can approach it this way to give everyone as practical guideline as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I would start with, like, even before we get prescriptive, that we think about inspiration as a fingerprint, right? So, Barry, what inspires you is really different, likely, than what inspires me. And so the first thing we ask people to do is to look at their best days and find the patterns that they think are fueling the best days happening, right? So for instance, one of mine is when I have some dedicated, really high quality present time with my 11-year-old first thing in the day. Like that helps me, we call it park the car downhill, right? Like I'm actually getting that little bit of edge on just getting the right values aligned, getting positive emotions activated on purpose, on point. So it's just a tiny example, but we each, for some people it might be steel cut oatmeal, right? It's like what are the even small, small I things that start to add up to creating your best day, and then we get more prescriptive for sure, because there really are these predictable ways that a lot of people source inspiration.
So step number one is looking back on your best days when you feel the best, and then discerning from that, okay, well, these things really give me
Yes.
boost the energy, so I need to incorporate them in my day. So let's say we all have to do some self-reflecting on that and add those things to our lives. And then on the other side of the coin, what are the universals? Like, what have you found? As Allison was mentioning, like unstructured time seems to lead to inspiration. What are the other things that enable someone to keep their inspiration sparked and sustained, but also like next level, help other people do the same, right? If you're leading others and you have the ability to influence them directly.
I'll jump in one more time. Go ahead, Sandy, go ahead.
When we talk about sustaining inspiration in the book, the very first thing we go to is return to the engines throughout the day. Use different engines, use different combinations, right? Mix your own cocktail of engines of inspiration. So that's an ongoing source. But then another thing that's really important is to, inspiration takes energy. And so you have to monitor and really actively manage your energy throughout the day. That's physical energy, but also emotional energy and cognitive energy and your sense of purpose and connection to what you're doing. And so we talk about the importance of energy resets throughout the day that can help you keep your energy level up. So it might be that you're taking a break to walk around or doing standing meetings or walking meetings, that kind of thing. It could be that you pause during the day for a moment of gratitude and just stop and say, even amidst all the crazy, what am I grateful for right now? What can I hold on to as something that's really great that's happening to me? It might be when you're going into a meeting where you know you really need to bring it, and you play your fight song before you sign up into the meeting, right? Before you click the link to Zoom, you get yourself fired up with the right music that draws the right energy for you. And so paying active attention to the different kinds of energy and what our energy levels are throughout the day makes a big difference, opens the space then, or gives us the resources then for the invincibility and possibility to come in. You got to keep that reservoir filled so that inspiration can happen.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, I think I love your question about what happens daily. And one of the things that we encourage in clients we work with is looking a week ahead, and we call it game planning, but sort of scoping ahead for the week, because some of these things are things that may not happen daily. I know for me personally, unstructured time is something that I build in weekly, but it doesn't happen necessarily every day. And that cadence works for me. It's better for me to have a longer chunk that's deeper, less frequent than trying to fit this in every day kind of thing. So there are certain things and practices that you can build in on a daily basis, as Sandy mentioned, to kind of keep energy up. And then there are things that, may be more of a longer cadence that you build in because they're important to you. And then there are certain engines that you may not tap into regularly, but they're things that you tap into to prepare for a particular situation, or if a situation arises that presents itself, right, that you're responding to it. As Sandy mentioned, you may want to get ready for a meeting or do something specific to reset, and you may pick a way to activate inspiration in that moment. So there are these ways that you can plan ahead, and then there's also ways that you can capitalize on when situations arise and you want to respond to them.
Right. So in all these 18 engines that we see here on the screen, a lot of them are, kind of like, they sound like they're all for creating these like positive inputs for us. But as you were mentioning, Allison, sometimes like there's a lot of also quote unquote negative, influences on us, right? Like the person that maybe gets under our skin, or something you really don't want to do, but you have to get done, and so forth. So could you talk a little bit about, how to sustain inspiration, especially in the face of those tasks or individuals that are like sap your energy and inspiration? What's the best way you found to deal with it?
Yeah. At first I would just say that, although inspiration can be a positive thing to experience, it doesn't always come from positive things. And, even in the engines that you see here, grief, loss, and failure, overcoming constraints. We hear this again, that difficult times and situations, people can process them, and at the time they may be difficult, but then they process them in a way that then allows them to grow forward from them. One of the folks that we interviewed for the book, Joe Casper, talked about losing his son and the grief that he experienced from losing his son, and how he he actually to this day holds on to that grief and keeps it close to him, because it's inspiring to him. It inspires him to take action in the world in the way that he does. And he brings together communities of people who have lost others. So it is a source of inspiration for him, but it's not necessarily a positive feeling that is inspiring him. So I think you can think about that too, and even day-to-day moments, right? Things that, you run into someone or have a situation that's maybe frustrating or difficult. We have a tool that we call a pivotal reset, and a pivotal reset is how do you pivot quickly from how you're feeling that frustration in that moment, and how do you pivot to producing it, into something that's more positive and being inspired to take action in a different way, aligned to your values. And it's not necessarily ignoring those feelings, because we know that if we ignore frustration or anger, in the field of emotional intelligence, ignoring or suppressing actually can make them bigger. So it's noticing them, processing them, experiencing them, knowing that your emotions are not you. So separating it, right? That I'm feeling this thing, but I'm not this thing, right? I might be feeling angry, but that doesn't mean I am this. I am angry. So it's kind of separating yourself a bit. And then to Sandy's point earlier, aligning to your values and your purpose. How do you want to act as a leader? How do you want to lead through these difficult emotions and situations in a way that lines up to your leader impact statement and your values and your purpose? And so the leader impact statement can be a really great guide to help you through those difficult or frustrating situations.
Thanks so much, Allison. All right, before we go into some audience questions, I want to encourage everyone listening live, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A box where you can type in any questions you may have for our speakers, and we'd love to get all your questions answered in the time we have available. I want to just ask, what would you say are, like when we're looking at this list, I want to just make sure that we don't leave certain things uncovered that might be really helpful to people. So it seems like you've really created this framework to manage our own selves, how we interact with others, and then deal with the broader environment. Should we quickly go through a few others that you think are really critical for people to keep in mind, and with a specific attention towards helping us really have it be like actionable? So what can we do today or tomorrow based on some of these other engines that you have here to really help maximize our level of inspiration and also help others do the same as well? Yeah,
go ahead, Sandy.
One of the ones I see coming up, I'll go quickly then, Jen. One of the ones I see coming up a lot right now is in the middle category, vulnerability. We see leaders struggling with wanting to be in command and know what's going on, but not having all the answers. None of us has all the answers right now. I was just working with a leader of a nonprofit who's having trouble with her leadership team. And when I talked to her about it's okay to not have the answers right now, and in fact, to say that to your team, we're going to go through this together. I don't have all the answers right now. The relief she felt, the ability to be her true self after hearing that, was tremendous. So one of the things that leaders can do today and maintain the respect of those who follow them is admit, I don't have all the answers. Here's how I'm going about getting the answers. Here's how we're going to work together to drive them. But the vulnerability engine can be a great source of inspiration right now.
Thank you, Sandy. Good.
I would offer that an amazing 1-2 punch happens from the first column of activating strengths and the second column serving others. And so, if you are looking for ways to inspire the folks on your team or your family, recognize their strengths, invite them to use them more, get them going on something that will activate their strengths, a new project, something that you need done, and if it's in service of a greater good, it's got that much more punch to it. So the whole month of April, a strategy that we're employing is to give our work as much as we can, because it's good for us to be giving it, to actually give, activate our strengths in service, to be giving coaching, to be giving webinars. We know our work is making a difference. We know it's helping those in need. It's also just a great reminder. It helps with new perspectives, right? We're developing new curriculum as a result of this crisis around resilience and agility, which is exciting and inspiring to be able to think about new ideas. As we're in service, we're seeing that there are people doing incredible things. Like if we just happen to be bored, like, I'm sorry, but there are people saving lives, there are people risking their lives, and it's happening right around the corner. So just to remember how lucky we are to be sitting safely at home and have the opportunity to give our work in different ways, like this podcast, just kind of a powerful trio on what's happening right now.
Thank you, Jen. So again, focusing our strengths and looking to serve others, that typically helps us overcome, because maybe instead of getting too stuck in our head and what we're feeling and thinking, it's much more around like, all right, what am I good at? What can I do to use that to help other people? So, and goes back to, I guess, the values on purpose a little bit as well, based on what your mission statement is.
Yep.
Any other engines that you'd want to mention while we still have a couple more minutes?
I'll just say really quickly that the movement and presence engine under the personal engines, for those people who can take meetings and conversations while walking or just moving, it's something that we've really encouraged. It seems like a small thing, but I think in today's climate can make a big difference. And if you're in a place where you can get outside and change your environment, that also can make a difference. If you can't get outside to new environments, and you see under the inspiring environments as one of our engines of inspiration as well, we're more affected by the space and environment around us than we think. It affects how we feel. For some people are especially sensitive to this, the light that they have, or just the colors that are around them. And there are, think about the environment that you're in, and are there things that you can do in this moment to make your immediate environment more inspiring to you, and or get out, even if it's a drive where you're going by yourself, if that's possible, or some people can still get outside and walk around.
Got it. Right. So movement, inspiring environments. Sandy, you have another
We
one?
have time for one more. I want to bring up overcoming constraints in the circumstances category. So many of us are working under new conditions now. How do I keep my team together remotely? How do we have productive meetings? How do we collaborate on things? For many of us, that's new challenges. We're constrained by having to work in different spaces. And there are tactical things we can do to overcome that and find inspiration in overcoming that. The way that we choose to, anything from what platform we use to connect on, and what visual cues we'll use when we're on video, we'll be on video, and we'll signal instead of everybody talking at once, ways that we can navigate that. But also sharing our calendars, carving out deep work time when you're not going to be available to everybody, time when your office door would be shut if we were in the same space. But then also letting people know when you're open and when your office door is open and when you can be working with them. Another tool that we have available for teams on our website, and I see that it's up in the chat box, thanks for that, is a checklist for remote meetings and how to do those more effectively, and how to embrace technology rather than fight against it for really remaining productive as a team. So I think overcoming constraints is another opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. So we got one question from the audience just now that I'm going to share. You've both, all three of you have been really clear in presenting everything. So there's a lot fewer questions than usual. Thank you for that. This question is, do you have any tips for first steps to pull yourself out of a bad rut of inspiration? And just my addition to this question is, can you share with us any kind of like, like almost like electrocuting somebody out of like, if they're just having a stretch of like days after days or weeks after weeks of just not being able to get out of it. What are some like strong interventions? Allison, you mentioned something about a pivot, like a power pivot or something like that. So we'd love to hear any thoughts you two might have. Go ahead, Jen.
I'm going to start even from zooming out a little bit more from a meta level, that sometimes when inspiration is really waning, what that's an indicator of is that something needs to change in your life. And so you kind of want to look for big patterns in your life that maybe need to be tweaked. Waning inspiration is a little bit different than burnout, but we work with, institutions that are battling against burnout a lot. And there's some similarities there as well. And so I would say, first zooming out and kind of really thinking about, could this emotion, right, this apathy, if you will, could that be an indicator for a change that you need to initiate?
Small or large, right? It's not necessarily turn your world upside down, but it does need to shift.
Yeah, that's
and now let's get to the fun part, the supercharge. We're big believers in how the system is, it really is foundationally based in our physical energy, right? One of my favorite quotes is Vince Lombardi, that fatigue makes cowards of us all. And so I would say maybe start with thinking about your physical energy and how you can charge that first, right? Just a couple ways to quickly impact your physical energy. Could be related to your sleep. It could be related to how you're fueling yourself and your diet. It could be related to movement, how often you're standing, how often you're getting up, right? And it could be related to exercise. So I would start with the physical, and I'll let my colleagues jump in with the next one.
Yeah, I would say something that I will often ask clients to think about as well is just really thinking back on a previous time when they were really inspired in different ways. And for some people, maybe that's a recent memory. For some, it's further back. But we will spend some time thinking back on those, reflecting, looking at them. What was happening then that's not happening now? And sometimes it may be something that's more structural in terms of how the day is unfolding. And sometimes it's a deeper thing, like, you've lost your sense of purpose, and you need to make a bigger kind of change. But we often find clues by reflecting and looking back, and we'll even have the engines of inspiration in front of us as we're doing that to say, all right, which engines were you really activating and leaning into and using the most during these times when you felt inspired? That's really important, because when, to Jen's point earlier, that we each have our own inspiration fingerprint. We're not saying, activate all 18 every single day and that'll be great. That's overwhelming, right? That the idea is to think about what are those top engines that are highest octane and most potent for you individually. And when you know that, then you can come back to them and you can reactivate them. It's not that you can't use the other 18 engines, but if you know that certain ones really work and you feel inspiration waning, now's the time to kind of dip back into those ones that are more familiar to you.
I'll just add one sentence, that another portal into that is gratitude. It's just saying, what am I grateful for right now? And that can help you get to what Allison's talking about, of the deeper, what you want to connect to more.
Excellent. So to summarize, really critical maybe to get moving, which was the first point Jen made. A wise friend of mine once told me also that depression and stillness, like if you have a friend who's feeling down, one of the best things you can get them to do is to actually just like move around physically, even if it's taking a walk. And the example my friend used, which was very visceral, so I'll share it, but stillness and a lack of movement, like that's akin to death, and life on the other hand is much more about movement and momentum. So that was a great one. And then Allison, you basically are encouraging us to really dive in and figure out, okay, so what are the things, like I might be super uninspired right now, but what are the things or the times where I felt most inspired, really having a short list of those things so that you can have them ready to infuse it into your life. And then Sandy, one of the interventions you mentioned is just gratitude, like reflect on what are you thankful for? Maybe you're not in your top mood right now and most inspired, but even now, what are you most grateful for? And go from there. So I would say, first of all, thank you so much, all three of you. This was excellent. The key takeaway for me from the whole conversation was the fact that just the importance of being intentional. Like if you want to be inspired, you can actually like work on that and do things to maximize the amount of time you feel inspired, and also help others do the same thing as well. So a lot of that comes from, on the one hand, knowing what inspires you, having your fingerprint of like what inspires you a lot, infusing that in your day. And then it's using these 18 engines that you mentioned in different forms to make sure that you can really maximize your inspiration quotient as much as possible. One way that I'd like to wrap this up, on the one hand, I'd like for you to share, what people can find in your book, Dare to Inspire, and also just to learn a bit more about your company for our members who'd want to potentially work with you directly or have their companies work with you directly. If you could just share with us how we can best support you, best engage with you through the book and through your company. And then after that, I would love to just hear from each of you one final piece of wisdom or advice when it comes to the topic of inspiration to help us wrap up.
Cool. In terms of our book, it's called Dare to Inspire. You can find it on Amazon and bookstores, all kinds of, just Google it, it'll come up. And what I'll say about the book is that it's got at the end of each chapter what we call work-its, which are exercises. And a lot of what we talked about today, some of the things we talked about today are work-its from the book, but there's a lot more of them. I have someone who emailed me the other day who said, I'm going through, it's on my nightstand, and I go through chapter by chapter, and each day I read it, and it's more relevant now than ever before, because I need inspiration. So if you walk through it, it'll guide you through a process that will help you understand personally how to both activate and sustain inspiration more readily.
And I'll say, go for it, Sandy. Go for it.
The book, and then I'd love for you to talk about the company. We're finding, there's real difficulty going on right now. I mean, we don't want to sort of whitewash over that. People are facing real challenges, financial, professional, emotional. And while we're talking about sunny things like inspiration and, oh, it's so easy, just apply yourself, what we are finding, people are telling us, is even through this difficulty, reading a couple of pages, taking a small step, experimenting with one engine, can actually help them kind of sort of start stepping out of what's going on. You got to remove yourself, unstick yourself from the down. And folks are saying to us that the book is helpful to them in that way. I understand that's just sort of unabashed promoting our book, and I'm sorry for that part of it. But if it could help you, we will hand the book to you. You don't have to buy it. Look for it for help.
I want to say one thing about the book, and then I'll say a little bit about our firm. When we asked leaders about most inspiring things that had happened in their career, almost always they recounted a hardship. And this points to a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth, that some of the most inspiring things that happen to us happen from really bad things. It's how we learn really deeply. It's how we get resourceful. And so on some level, I think we have a deep trust in the good that can come out of this if we're paying attention and we're supporting each other. So yeah, post-traumatic growth and just, not being afraid to step in. We heard so many stories about really horrible things happening in careers, and that being the opening or springboard to something extraordinary. A bit about our company. We are an inspiration strategy firm. So what we do is we partner with organizations to increase inspiration and use it as a resource in realizing their highest priorities, in realizing their strategy, and realizing their goals. This often looks like helping to shape and develop leaders. So how do the leaders in their company, as a key leverage point, how do they become more inspiring? How do they understand inspiration in new ways? And most importantly, how do they understand it as a most valuable resource to be managed in their organization? That's how we think about inspiration, as a resource to be managed.
And the business results of doing that range from, you know, people being more excited about their work and digging into it, to better information sharing, breaking down silos, more innovation happening. I mean, the bottom line impact is a big part of our interest, along with people realizing their greatest contributions and the good that comes from that. So it's we're bottom line focused at the same time as focused on people having a really good experience in their work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all three of you. Final words, one piece of wisdom that you might want to leave our listeners with.
Be good to yourself during a difficult time. Treat yourself well. Show yourself grace.
Thank you, Sandy. Allison and Jen, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would say think about a small or even bigger way that you want to give back. That giving of others, and some people are on the front lines and giving a lot. If you're not on the front lines or at home, there's other ways that you can give back to others. I'm really inspired by the quote by Anne Frank, which is that how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. And so there are big and small ways that we can all contribute and do this during this time.
Yeah, I would just put the cherry on the sundae by saying, don't underestimate even the tiniest acts of connection. You know, just a text, a kind 3-word text to someone that you love, you know, the difference that makes for you and for other people. And what we know in the research is, both in terms of, you know, battling against burnout and being most productive and fulfilled in remote working, is that the little actions, lots of little actions mean more than bigger. So the frequency is important.
Love that. Thank you. It's summarizing what you said. So starting with Sandy was be kind to yourself. Allison was be kind to others, give back. And Jen, thank you for reminding us of the importance of connection, especially during this very difficult time, as frequently as possible, even if it's small. Thank you so much, all three of you. Wishing you the very best, and I really appreciate you being here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today and participating in this conversation. Wishing everyone the best, and looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.